Hi, my name is Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss the theatre of COVID measures debate in and around Parliament yesterday as a Conservative MP opened their mouth inadvisedly to try and heckle the Labour leader Keir Starmer, only to be immediately shot down. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, yes, just as Starmer will be pulling Johnson's pants down again in Prime Minister's questions, and from your point of view, later today, which I'll inevitably get onto tomorrow. Yesterday was a bit of a bonus round over the second COVID lockdown, post-lockdown tier system that should be coming in place after it, that Boris Johnson wants to put in place to improve on his first one. Now, fair enough, he's accepted that his last one wasn't good enough and he wants to improve it. You don't knock the sentiments. It's better than stubbornly sticking to something that clearly doesn't work. Even though, however, he's not exactly trying his hardest to make it fit for purpose. An improvement's still an improvement, but you know, when people's lives and livelihoods are at stake, you do sort of expect better. And Starmer certainly did. So I talked about Labour voting to abstain in a video yesterday ahead of the vote. But it's worth going over some of the exchanges as well and in and around the debates, because it's important, not only because it can be quite heartening as well from a partisan political point of view, but just from an objective point of view, it's actually quite important. Because one thing that cannot be stressed enough really is that the Conservatives are flying by the seat of their pants regarding their COVID response, and they are playing party politics with their decisions. Which is why, of course, their measures never stand up to serious scrutiny. So the day started with some nonsense about Scotch egg. Ministers were tying themselves in knots, trying to work out under what circumstances a Scotch egg could be classed as a substantial meal. The reason being that once you enter tier 2, and as people keep pointing out, as the media keep pointing out, basically 99% of people in England are in tier 2 or above. So this will apply to the vast majority of the country. So, but in tier 2, as well as tier 3, of course, restaurants are allowed to open. Well, in tier 2, restaurants are allowed to open, but pubs technically not. However, they can open if they serve a substantial meal with the drinks. You can't just go in there for a drink. You have to have a meal. Now, if you want a meal with a drink, then that's apparently okay. So now you have to work out what it means by a substantial or substantive meal. I forget which word they use exactly. And the reason it's such a pointless argument is because the rule only exists as a political fudge anyway. It's not like this is an advised rule. Public health experts have said for the longest times that actually basically restaurants and similar venues are the worst things to have open during a pandemic. Because, you know, you cannot really take serious measures. You've got people from different households far too close together. Never mind this distancing rubbish. They're moving around each other's space when they go to the toilet, for example, things like that. When they come in, when they exit, even if you have a different entrance and exit, which not all restaurants will, you know, they're not wearing masks because that's hardly conducive to eating. And the virus hangs in the air for quite a long time. You could actually become infected with COVID in a restaurant from someone who left the place an hour before you even entered. A person with whom you had no contact at all, close or otherwise, but you breathed in their air and that was that. But the government want restaurants open. Not realistic to keep them closed until we had a vaccine anyway, I suppose, and the government couldn't be asked to pursue a zero COVID strategy, which of course they should have done. And that would have allowed it, you know, to have opened up by now relatively safely. And that's the thing, of course. They refuse to opt for either of the safe options. Either get the virus under control really quickly, which we should have been able to do. We're an island that had advanced warning. We had a lot longer to prepare relative to a lot of other comparable countries, and we're an island. Can't stress that enough. Public health experts can't stress that enough. So they didn't want to do that, but they also don't want to just support restaurants and other businesses in the hospitality sector to close so that we can safely manage it any other way. So in tier 2, pubs aren't allowed basically because they don't want to take the mickey with a load of drunks running around. They know that that's inherently bad, people just going in drinking. But they can't really, they don't want to support pubs to close. And then also you could say, well, some restaurants serve alcohol as well. Was that going to be banned? No, of course not. Because where are the Tory MPs going to get drunk when the House of Commons bar kicks them out? So they said pubs can open as long as customers are only there to have a meal alongside their drinks. So it's a right old mess, because the reasoning for the rule in the first place doesn't make sense. Then trying to find holes in it, which obviously a journalist's job to try and find holes in it and pin down exactly what it means that it is very difficult to define because it's a mess. So Starmer then also turned his attention to the fact that the new tier system doesn't do what it should either. So obviously what the tier system is supposed to do is to reduce rates of infection so that you can drop down a tier. But it doesn't. The Labour leader said, look, tier 1 may slow down the increase in infection rate, but it won't stop it. So in other words, the infection rate will still rise under the measures in tier 1. You may slow down that rise, but it will still rise, which means inevitably, unless you're going to make political decisions on who's in which tier, which of course they have, you're going to find yourself in tier 2. And they said, well, tier 2 measures are also unlikely to stop a rise in infections as well. Might be better than the first attempt, but then the first attempt was a complete shambles. So the tier system really exists as a progression. When you're in tier 1, given time, you will find yourself in tier 2. If you're in tier 2, you will find yourself in tier 3. And from tier 3, there was certainly no escape from tier 3 beforehand. With the new measures, maybe you can be charitable and say, well, let's see. But it's better than the first attempt, but it has the same problem with the first tier system in that all you do is progress upwards, never downwards. So that's all there is to it. Now then Starmer began laying out what the situation we're going to find ourselves in 2 weeks' time. And this is the point where a Conservative MP very foolishly opened their pie hole. See, Boris Johnson keeps trying to call Starmer Captain Hindsight. Now, the politics of this is obvious. He's trying to suggest that actually, all things considered, the government have actually done a jolly good job. Of course there were missteps, of course, absolutely. But unprecedented times and all that. You couldn't possibly have seen them except in your rear view mirror. Pups, Captain Hindsight, say, oh, you should have done it this way. Well, thanks a lot. Why didn't you tell us beforehand? Of course, he did tell you beforehand. It's all an absolute nonsense. No calamity that has befallen us has gone unheralded. But Johnson keeps trying anyway, and absolutely it will work on some people. So there we go. That's the party politics. So this Tory MP, obviously trying to score some brownie points, tries to come on the old hindsight thing with Starmer. And that's what he called out. As Starmer was speaking, he was calling out about hindsight, suggesting that the Labour leader was speaking from a position of hindsight. At which point he stopped and then had to explain to the hapless moron opposite that what he was describing was a prediction for the future. He was explaining what's going to happen in 2 weeks. Big laugh from the opposition benches. Tory gobshite shot down. On he proceeded. And the thing is, this general hindsight argument, he is now using it against the government. Because what he's sort of saying is, look, particularly with support for businesses, the government's missteps could be understood at first. Gaps in the system. You brought out the furlough scheme. Now, we applauded that. There were gaps in it. They shouldn't have been there. But due to the hurried nature of the measures, he was being charitable, by the way, because the government have gone against the scientific and economic advice from the very start, with the exception of the furlough scheme. But as I say, it didn't really go enough. And they never got it to be in a targeted way. The Chancellor had to admit that it was his measures weren't targeted. They're still not really targeting. But Starmer was making the point that there wasn't an excuse now. It's 8 months later. Like I say, especially when it comes to that support for businesses and workers. He said, look, you've had 6 economic plans in 8 months. And this, of course, is Labour's rationale for abstaining on the vote. The measures are better than nothing, still not fit for purpose, but you're abandoning people who are being financially damaged by the government's handling without adequate compensation. And he again pointed out that the government didn't use the second lockdown, to fix, test and trace either. Just like during the relatively quiet summer when they had the opportunity, they didn't do it then either. And he also pointed out that Johnson seems to have grown bored of his favourite toy, test and trace, in favour of mass testing. suggesting that the Prime Minister has abandoned the idea of fixing the very leaky test and trace system when that was going to be the game changer in summer, and was now putting all his efforts into mass testing. I say efforts, faith, shall we say. To which my immediate thoughts were, well, when they talk about this mass testing, I think what they're talking about, correct me if I'm wrong, are these quick tests that have about a 50% accuracy rate. But it is certainly true that Johnson spent his entire time boasting about how this thing is coming and it's going to make it all right. Yeah, I know everything's bad now, but we've been working terribly hard. We've got this thing coming. It's just round the corner. It'll all be sorted. It's all fine. And then the time comes, it's not fine as it happens. And then he moves on to the next thing that's going to make it all right. He's like the world's worst deadbeat dad. And the Lib Dems got in on the act too. So they were, getting in on the old predictions there, lest they be called, hindsight, explaining that it was quite clear that we're going to get another lockdown in January as well. That's coming. I was only half listening. I'm not sure if anyone suggested that actually what it probably mean is in reality, not so much a lockdown in January as a longer lockdown in March, something like that. In fact, looking ahead to January should be quite interesting in a potentially terrifying sort of way. Because, we've got Brexit chaos, a potential third COVID wave, and then people will be expecting their vaccinations. I wonder how that will go. Actually, no, I don't wonder how that will go because I've been paying attention to 2020. But there you are. That's how things have been shaping up with the government's well-worked COVID response. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.